Stepmom told me I would not get anything from my father's 36 million will. She sat there all happy during the reading of the will, but then the lawyer read one sentence and he smiled. My name is Lana Mason. And if you ever had a happy childhood where every evening was filled with the warmth of bedtime stories, where every step home welcomed you with the scent of your mother's baking and the tight embrace of your father, then maybe you'll understand that what I lost wasn't just a person. I lost an entire world. I used to be Daddy's little princess from the moment I learned to walk until I was 14. He always called me his little light. Every afternoon after school, I'd spot his car parked right outside the gate, the window rolled down, his hand waving, and his smile beaming beneath the sunlight. On weekends, we'd go to the supermarket together, buy frozen pizzas, and pick out an old animated movie to watch with Mom on our worn-out sofa. My family was never rich, but we had our own kind of abundance, one made of kindness, presence, and laughter. That was until one June afternoon, when my mother collapsed in the kitchen, still laughing from a joke we had shared, her hands trembling as she struggled to open a bottle of ketchup. Cancer. Terminal stage. Discovered too late. Nothing could be done. In just 5 months, the woman who had been the heart of our home withered away strand by strand of hair, smile by fading smile, breath by breath. I don't remember how many nights I secretly curled up beneath her hospital bed, listening to her soft groans, too afraid to cry. My father lost more than 20 pounds. He cried in front of me for the first time. And it was also the last. Because less than 6 months after my mother passed, my father brought home another woman, Vanessa Langston. A woman with a smile as sharp as a blade and eyes so tender they made my skin crawl. Vanessa used to be a colleague, my father said. She's been helping me get through the hard times. He repeated that line so many times it became meaningless. But what truly silenced me was the way he held her hand in the kitchen, the very same spot where my mother once stood, pouring milk into my glass every morning. Vanessa started spending the night after a few weeks. She moved her things into my father's bedroom, the room my mother, once decorated with heart-shaped pillows and the sparkly pink nightlight I had gifted her for Christmas in 5th grade. No one asked me. No one cared how I felt. Then one day, I came home from school to find my bedroom, my childhood room, covered in cat stickers and award certificates completely cleared out. My father told me, from now on, you'll sleep in the living room. That room is for Kyle, Vanessa's son. Kyle was 9 at the time. He started calling my father Dad just 3 weeks after they met, but for over a year, he only referred to me as she, never as sister. I moved onto the stiff sofa, my head just inches from the glass door. Every morning, Vanessa would walk past me, tap my foot with her high heels, and smile as if it were an accident. I cried once in front of my father asking him why he had pushed me aside like this. He stayed quiet for a long moment, then finally said, "This is what's best for everyone." I started coming home later, skipping dinner. I ate at school, studied at the library, and picked up part-time shifts at the bookstore. I was only 15. By 16, Vanessa had Kyle calling me Miss Lana because she's older than you, but she's not family. And I watched as my father, the man who once called me his little light, nodded silently in agreement. By the time I turned 17, the tension in our home had become irreparable. That was the day I received my acceptance letter to a prestigious summer program at an arts institute in New York, a chance I had worked tirelessly for, applying for scholarships and writing essays for months. I rushed home, eyes glowing, and handed the letter to my father. But before he could say a word, Vanessa cut in sharply. "New York? We don't have money for nonsense like that. You should know your place, young lady." I turned to my father. All I needed was one word of support, just one glance of approval. But he just stood there, not looking at me, not looking at anyone. I remember screaming. Not out of anger, but because it felt like my chest had caved in. My heart crushed beyond repair. I screamed for my mother, the one who once told me I could do anything. I screamed for myself, the daughter left behind. That night, I packed only what could fit into a single backpack. I left my house key on the dining table, the same table where we used to gather for toast and silly stories in the morning. I walked out without a goodbye. No one stopped me. And from that night on, I learned how to exist without needing anyone to remember that I ever did. I left the place I used to call home on a hot summer night. No dramatic exits, no tearful farewells, just the dry sound of the door clicking shut behind me. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew one thing. I couldn't stay in a house where every step I took felt like an inconvenience, and every breath I breathed felt like a stain no one wanted to see. I crashed on a friend's floor for the first 3 weeks, using an old coat as a body pillow. Then I got a job washing dishes at a small restaurant in the Latin district. The pay was terrible, my hands raw from dish soap, but at least no one looked at me with pity. I lived on every penny. Dry bread, instant noodles, tap water. No Starbucks. No midnight pizza like the kids my age. I kept every receipt like it was a survival map. I went to school by day, worked by night. At one point, I juggled 3 jobs: evening shifts at a cafe, tutoring math for a single mom's kid, and cashiering at a convenience store on weekends. I've fallen asleep on buses, eaten cold rice walking through snow, and had my wages stolen. But never, not once, did I go back to knock on that door. Not a single message. Because I knew there was no one on the other side waiting. At 18, I got into a top university in another state. Psychology. It sounded noble, though plenty of people told me straight to my face, that degree won't pay your bills. I smiled softly. Pay my bills? I had been paying my own way since I was 17 by scrubbing toilets and wiping down greasy tables. I thought I'd be fine. But, truthfully, there were times I wasn't. There were nights I had to choose between buying textbooks or paying the electric bill. During finals, I sat in the library with bloodshot eyes from sleep deprivation, my hands trembling from hunger. On Thanksgiving, the dorms were empty, everyone gone home, and I lay curled up under my blanket, staring at a blank messaging app. No one checked in. No. "Are you okay?" from Dad. No happy birthday from anyone who used to call themselves my family. During those 6 years, I completely disappeared from their world. And they never once came looking. Every now and then, I would secretly check Vanessa's Instagram, driven by nothing but bitter curiosity. She often posted pictures with Kyle, my father, standing in the background, his hand gently resting on her son's shoulder, as if he had never had a daughter before. There were photos of giant birthday cakes, golden beach vacations, and captions so polished they cut. "Family is where there's a loving husband and a hard-working son. So proud of Kyle, the only child I've ever needed." I used to take screenshots of those captions, not to do anything with them, just to remind myself to never forget what it felt like to be erased so completely. Strangely, the more I was excluded, the more determined I became to live with integrity. Not to prove anything to them, but because I didn't want to become like them. I held on to the values my mother once taught me: gratitude, honesty, never using hate as revenge. I enrolled in community counseling courses, worked as a research assistant for a professor, wrote articles for the student journal. I didn't have much, but I had something they never gave me: a belief in myself. By my final year of college, I was awarded a full scholarship for a master's research program. On graduation day, I did something even I couldn't fully explain. After years of silence, after being forgotten time and time again, I typed out my father's old email address and hit send. It was just a simple invitation. No bitterness, no accusations, just: "My graduation will be held at 9 a.m. this Saturday at the main auditorium. If you're free, it would mean a lot to see you there." I read that sentence over and over before sending it. Not to revise it, but to ask myself, what am I doing? Sending this to someone who chose to disappear from my life? To the man who let me sleep on the couch to make room for his new wife's son? But there was still a part of me, weak, foolish, that hoped, just a little, that maybe he'd show up unexpectedly. That he'd stand at the back of the auditorium and wave, like he used to when I was a little girl waiting at the school gate. That even if it was just a glance in the crowd, I'd know he hadn't completely forgotten me. That morning, I wore my deep blue graduation gown the color of psychology. I did my own makeup, took the bus alone. All around me, students were surrounded by family mothers holding bouquets, fathers taking photos, little siblings holding signs that said, "Congratulations, sis." I had no one. I stood alone in the sunny courtyard, clutching my diploma as if it were the only friend that had never left me. I still looked around, still silently hoped, but he didn't come. I walked onto the stage to receive my degree, bowed, and stepped down like a shadow passing through light. That evening, I opened Instagram, out of old habit. And like a cold slap to the face, the first post I saw was from Vanessa, my stepmother. The photo showed Kyle standing next to a gleaming white Range Rover, key in hand, grinning from ear to ear. And beneath it, a caption that felt like someone had crushed my ribs with their bare hands. From Dad to my smart boy Kyle, always proud of you. Happy 18th, son. The day I graduated was also Kyle's birthday, and my father, the same man who had received my invitation, said nothing. No reply, no acknowledgement. But he still went, just not to me. He went somewhere else. Gave a gift I had never even dared to dream of. A car, a recognition, a hug, a word of pride, none of it for me. I sat frozen in my tiny rental room, the flickering fluorescent light above trembling like the hollow part of me. I didn't cry, there were no more tears left. Just an emptiness, steady and quiet, that seeped into every inch of me. An emptiness called acceptance. I accepted that some people who once gave us life, can learn to feel nothing for us. They can choose to erase memories. Choose to start over. Choose a new child, a new life in which we never existed. I took down my graduation photo from my profile. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't need anyone to see it anymore. I saw it, I was there. I rose from the rubble of memory and finished what my father once called a fantasy. That was enough. A few weeks later, I overheard an old friend say, "Kyle went live when he got the car." Tons of people watched. Mr. Mason even left a touching message. It made some cry. I smiled. Not because it made me happy, but because I finally saw everything clearly. That was the final cut. Not because I was weak, but because I had held on too long to a version of someone who no longer existed. The father I once loved was gone. The man standing in his place was just the echo of a choice to erase me from his life. That night, I pulled out a small wooden box from under my bed, the place I kept the things that meant the most. Photos of Mom, a handwritten letter she gave me when I was 10, and a brown notebook where I once scribbled my childhood dreams. I flipped to the first page. There it was, a line I wrote back in 6th grade. "One day, I'll grow up and do something to make Mom proud." I touched the ink with my fingertips. And for the first time in years, I cried. Not because I had been abandoned, but because I realized I had kept my promise. Without anyone's validation, without flowers, without a father. I had grown up. And I had not become like them. That afternoon, it rained. A cold, steady kind of rain, like someone slowly pouring sadness over the rooftops. I was in my office, rinsing out an old coffee mug, my hands still soapy, when the phone rang. An unfamiliar number from my old state. I almost didn't pick up. Over the years, I had learned to let things go unanswered. But somehow, my hand slipped, and I answered. "Hello. This is Jenna from, calling from the offices of Goodman and Hall," a woman's voice said, clear, professional, emotionless. I frowned. I had no reason to be hearing from a law firm. "We regret to inform you." She paused. "That Mr. Richard Mason, your biological father, passed away yesterday morning at his residence." I went still. The room suddenly became so quiet I could hear a single drip from the leaky faucet. My hand clenched into a fist. The rain outside the window quickened, as if someone had nudged time forward all at once. "Are you still with me, Miss Mason?" The woman's voice softened. I'm here," I said, though my own voice sounded like it came from someone else entirely. "We're calling to inform you that your name is listed as a primary beneficiary. Your presence is required at the reading of the will. It will take place this Friday at 3 p.m. at our office on Grand Avenue. I send what? I don't remember what I said in response. Just some automatic thank you slipping out before I ended the call. I stood there in the kitchen, still holding the phone, staring through the rain-smeared window. A part of me wished it was a mistake, that another call would come to correct it in the next few minutes, but no call came. Instead, memories surged back like a flood, memories I thought I had buried for good, alongside his cold stare and that cursed birthday post. I sank into a chair, my mind completely blank. He's gone. My father. He had once been my whole world, even though that world had turned its back on me, and yet, he left. Without a word, no message. No phone call. Not even a line from Vanessa. They stayed silent, just like they did the day I left. Silent enough for me to understand exactly where I stood. And now, again, it wasn't my family who told me. It was a law firm. I don't know how long I sat there. The clock ticked, the second hand spun in circles, but I couldn't track the time. Only one question kept echoing through my mind: should I go? I didn't care about the inheritance. I never expected to receive anything from him except silence, but this will reading wasn't about money anymore. It was closure. A farewell. A final chance to bury the ache of being left behind that I'd carried all these years into adulthood. I wouldn't go for them. I would go for me. To face the place that once rejected me. To find out if the man who didn't choose me had left behind anything other than silence. And more than that, I needed to witness with my own eyes the end of a chapter I had lived in the shadows for far too long. 3 days later, I booked a flight back home. The old city greeted me with dry, cold air and rooftops stained with gray memories. I stood before the hotel mirror wearing a simple black outfit, my hair pulled back, no makeup. I wasn't there to impress. I was there to end something. The funeral was held on a Thursday morning under a dull, overcast sky, the clouds hanging low like a velvet curtain pulled tight over the day. I arrived early, not out of eagerness, but because I didn't want to walk in late like someone who didn't belong. The funeral home sat beside a quiet hill, its grounds paved with marble stone, lined with neat rows of white flowers. The scent of lavender drifted in the air, blending with the faint musk of damp wood and soft-scented candles. Inside, the chairs were arranged in 3 main rows, the front row marked family, with name tags placed carefully on each seat. I entered quietly. No one greeted me. No eyes acknowledged my presence as something natural. No one stood to offer a seat, or nodded the way one might toward a relative. Every glance that passed over me felt like I was a misplaced server at a lavish banquet. Vanessa sat in the front row, her hands gloved in black silk, head tilted just so, the perfect image of a dignified widow. Beside her was Kyle wearing dark sunglasses, a sharp black suit, posture composed. They looked like a magazine photo brought to life, the successful wife and accomplished son. No one mentioned me. Not a single copy of the memorial program had my name. There was no seat marked Lana Mason. I stood still, eyes fixed on the nameplates. Vanessa Langston Mason, spouse. Kyle Mason, son. Then I turned and quietly walked to the back row, choosing a seat in the farthest corner where no one would notice if I cried, or if I stood up and walked out. A middle-aged man, probably one of my father's business partners, leaned over and whispered to the woman next to him. Though their voices were hushed, I heard every word. "Who's that girl?" Someone said she's his daughter from a previous relationship. Hasn't been around in years. Not really close. Practically absent from Mason's life these days. I curled my fingers tightly into my palm. Not out of anger, but sadness. Sadness at how easily people rewrite someone's story with just a few whispered lines. They didn't know I was once his little princess. They never saw me sleeping under his desk when Mom had to travel. They didn't know I spent hours drawing a Father's Day card for him in 2nd grade. Kyle turned slightly, tilting his head in my direction, his face calm, as though about to say something perfectly reasonable. "Why are you here?" he asked quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. "This is a family matter," Not everyone belongs here. I looked at him for a few seconds. No sharpness in my gaze. No response, just silence. Because that question, "Why are you here?" was one I had asked myself hundreds of times over the years. I wasn't here to take anything. I was here because this was the end of a chapter I once belonged to, but was never given the chance to close properly. The officiant began to speak, his voice low and solemn. Today, we gather to honor the life of Mr. Richard Allen Mason, a businessman, founder of Mason Biopharma, a devoted husband, a dedicated father. I went still. A dedicated father? Suddenly, I felt like a spectator in a play that had been rewritten from scratch, a version where the director had cut my role entirely, replacing me with a more polished character, less complicated, easier to fit into the narrative. One by one, people came forward to speak: old partners, co-founders, longtime neighbors. They described him as a legend, a pillar, a man who always put his family first. No one mentioned me. No one said he once had a daughter named Lana Mason. I sat with my back straight. No bowed head, no tears. Because I had cried enough. I had heard enough. I wasn't there to listen to stories about a father I no longer recognized. I came to stare into the empty space, the space where love should have been, but had long since been replaced with selective silence. I didn't blame the people around him. They only knew a fraction. I blamed him for allowing others to redefine fatherhood through curated captions on social media. When the final piano notes of the farewell song faded and the mourners began to rise, whispering their goodbyes, shaking hands, I remained seated. That moment, those few quiet minutes, were the only time in years that I had shared a space with my family. And even here, I was still just a background character. A supporting role in my own story. I stepped into the office of Goodman and Hall once more, this time not to hear of my father's death, but to find out what he left behind, or rather, what he didn't for me. In stark contrast to the cold, performative funeral, the will reading took place in a smaller, but far more luxurious private room. Polished oak walls, deep wine-colored leather chairs, and soft chandelier light cast a glow that was both warm and heavy. Vanessa sat to the left of the attorney's desk, spine rigid like the lady of the house receiving guests. Her black funeral dress had been replaced with a tailored cream Chanel suit, sleek, cold, and so expensive it almost erased the fact that she had once been the other woman. A Hermes bag rested delicately on her lap, every detail meticulous. Her left hand gently held Kyle's, now a 4-year-old man, but still her sweet boy in every glance. Kyle wore a pale gray blazer, the glint of a Rolex flashing from beneath the sleeve of his charcoal shirt. He had the composure of someone long used to receiving love, receiving wealth, receiving unquestioned loyalty from everyone around him. And me? I entered in an old white blouse with a frayed cuff, a plain black skirt, my hair tied back like I was heading to work. No makeup. No perfume. No mask to cover who I was. Attorney William Crane invited everyone to take their seats. I chose one slightly off to the side, not close enough to pretend I belonged, but not far enough to be invisible. I hadn't come to draw near to anything that was never meant for me. "We'll begin," Mr. Crane said, placing his hand on a thick folder embossed with Richard A. Mason's name in formal black ink. "This is the last will and testament, drafted on the 28th of December of last year, legally signed and notarized, and reflects the final wishes of Mr. Richard Mason." I gave a faint nod. Vanessa showed no reaction except for crossing her legs and adjusting the silk scarf around her neck. Kyle raised his brows slightly, hand resting on his chin, his gaze locked on the folder like someone who already knew what was inside. First, the attorney read, his tone measured and calm. "Mr. Richard Mason bequeaths the Palm Beach property, including full ownership of the land, all furnishings, and future rental income, to his son Kyle Langston Mason." Kyle gave a small nod. He didn't smile, but his eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. "In addition, Mr. Crane continued, Kyle will receive a cash inheritance of $300,000 to be transferred from Mr. Mason's private investment account within 90 days of probate completion. Vanessa gently squeezed her son's hand and leaned in to whisper too softly for me to hear, but I could guess the words. Something like, "I told you so," or, "It's all yours." The kind of language spoken by someone who's always believed they're exactly where they belong in the grand design. I remained silent. My hands folded tightly in my lap, my eyes fixed on a small scratch in the polished wood of the table. No one in that room looked in my direction. They moved through the reading as if I didn't exist cleanly, efficiently, without pretense. "Next," the lawyer said, turning the page, "to Mrs. Vanessa Langston Mason, the current legal spouse of Mr. Richard Mason. He leaves the antique art collection, comprising 7 post-impressionist paintings currently held at the primary residence, full ownership of the 2022 Bentley Continental, and a cash inheritance of $500,000. This time, Vanessa smiled. Fully, unapologetically. She placed a hand over her chest as if moved, though her eyes gleamed with the sharpness of someone who had just secured victory in a long, silent chess match. "We were always by his side," she said gently, more as a declaration than a remark, never once looking at me. Kyle turned his head slightly to glance at me, a half-smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Maybe he was waiting for a reaction. But I gave him none. I had rehearsed this moment for 6 years. The moment I wouldn't be named. The moment nothing would be left for me. No house, no car, not even a single line to prove I had ever shared the same blood as that man. The lawyer closed the main file. The room relaxed, as if the script had ended. Vanessa let out a soft sigh, like someone satisfied with the last chapter. But then, Mr. Crane didn't rise. Instead, he slowly opened the drawer beneath his desk and pulled out a thick envelope, sealed with red wax. The room fell suddenly silent, so silent I could hear the wind whistling faintly through the crack in the glass behind me. "And finally," he said, his tone shifting, firm and low. "Mr. Richard Mason left a supplemental addendum, signed on the 14th of March of this year, just 3 weeks before his death. This document was written separately, officially notarized, and accompanied by a handwritten letter, which he specifically requested be read after the primary will had been disclosed." Vanessa furrowed her brow. Kyle leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. No one said a word, but the atmosphere had changed. And me? I stayed still. But something stirred in my chest, not hope exactly, but no longer despair either, just readiness. Mr. Crane carefully sliced through the wax seal and pulled out a fresh stack of papers. He looked up at me, then turned to Kyle and Vanessa. And then, he smiled, no mockery, no warmth, just the calm of a man about to reveal a secret that only one person in the room had suspected all along. "What I'm about to read," he said, voice lowered to half its usual weight, "will change everything." He drew the first page, checked for the official stamp, then spoke, slowly and clearly. "This is a handwritten codicil to the last will and testament of Richard Mason, dated the 14th of March, 3 weeks prior to his passing, witnessed and notarized at a second law office in San Diego." I sat up just a little straighter, my chest tightening under a slow, rising heat that pressed against my ribs. Vanessa shifted in her seat. Kyle furrowed his brows, his lips pressed into a hard line, one finger tapping the armrest of his chair with mounting tension. He could feel it, something wasn't right. Then, the lawyer began to read. "I, Richard Allen Mason, in full mental clarity and sound health at the time of writing, hereby add the following provision to my will." It felt as if the entire room had stopped breathing. My lips were dry, my hands tightened in my lap, but I kept my gaze on Mr. Crane, revealing nothing. "I am fully aware of the mistakes I've made in the past. The words left unsaid, the wrongs left unrighted, they have quietly eaten away at me until the final days of my life." A chill crept down my spine. "Therefore, I state clearly, the entirety of my shares in Mason Biopharma, valued at $24 million US, the remainder of my real estate holdings, including the estate in Aspen, the Manhattan penthouse, and the Napa Valley vineyard, as well as the full balance of my private trust fund, amounting to $36 million are hereby left to my only biological daughter, Lana Mason. It took a full second before the room seemed to comprehend what had just been said. I didn't move, I didn't smile, I didn't cry. I sat still like the ghost I had been in this family for years now, finally called by name in my own story. And Vanessa? Her mouth fell open. Her hand gripped the strap of her Hermes bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. A small, strangled sound escaped her throat, as if she meant to say something but no words came out. She turned to the lawyer, then to Kyle, then to me. Her eyes flashed with panic, the triumph on her face vanishing without a trace, replaced by disbelief and something dangerously close to fear. Kyle wasn't as composed. He shot to his feet, his chair clattering backward, the sound of wood against tile echoing sharply through the room. No, this isn't real, he shouted, his voice shaking like the ground had just been ripped from beneath him. This is fake. My father would never do this. He loved me, I'm his son. Mr. Crane remained composed, but his gaze turned steely. This codicil has been validated by 2 independent attorneys, notarized with a state seal, and accompanied by an audio recording made by Mr. Richard Mason on the day it was signed. We have complete legal documentation. Any disputes may, of course, be taken to court, but I sincerely doubt that would be in your best interest. Kyle stood frozen, his face flushed red, hands trembling with rage. Vanessa reached for his arm, trying to pull him back down, but even she couldn't hide her panic. Her silk scarf had slipped slightly to one side. A loose strand of hair fell across her forehead. For the first time since I walked into this room, she no longer looked like a symbol of control and power but a woman completely unmoored. And me? I remained still, no tears, no sighs, no shaking. Because I knew. This wasn't my victory. This was his final attempt to set things right, a man who once shattered me, but perhaps, in his last days, was clear-minded enough to lay a brick of truth before the door he once slammed shut. Mr. Goodman gently closed the final pages of the will, then leaned forward to unzip a leather portfolio beside him. There's one more thing, Miss Mason, he said, turning his eyes to me. His voice was slower now, careful, as though he feared any sudden sound might snap the tension hanging thick in the room. Before his death, your father asked us to record a video message. He wanted to say goodbye, in his own words. The room fell completely silent. Vanessa furrowed her brows. Kyle folded his arms and shook his head in irritation. I sat up straight, gripping the edge of my chair so tightly my knuckles ached. Mr. Goodman gave a nod to his assistant. The screen lit up, showing a softly blurred frame. The corners glowed with an overexposed white, and at the center sat an old man in a hospital room, washed in sterile light. An IV line hung from his left arm. His face was thin, worn down by illness, but his eyes, the eyes were still there. The same eyes that once held me steady as I learned to walk, the same ones that taught me how to ride a bike, that sat beside me at the piano where he and Mom used to play back when she was alive. I don't remember when I started crying, only that my chest felt like it had been scooped hollow, empty, and yet overflowing with everything unsaid. On the screen, my father took a shallow breath, then smiled faintly. His voice was hoarse from sickness, but every word landed clear and deliberate. Lana, if you're watching this, it means I'm already gone. And this is the last thing I get to say to you. I tightened my grip on the chair. My eyes didn't leave the screen. I know, I was wrong. From the day your mother passed, I couldn't handle the emptiness. Instead of facing that pain with you, I tried to fill it with someone new, with a new life, and in doing that, I left you behind. He paused, his eyes lowered. In the background, the soft beep of a heart monitor ticked like a countdown. I saw you leaving that day, dragging your suitcase across the tiles. I wanted to run after you, but I turned away, like a coward. A tear slid down my cheek. Across the room, Vanessa sat frozen, her eyes locked on the screen. Her face no longer proud, just shaken. Kyle mumbled under his breath, "This isn't real, this has to be fake." But no one responded. My father continued, "You don't have to forgive me. I'm not asking for that. Only that, if you choose, I've left you what I have as a way to give you the power to decide how this chapter ends." 9 Off Dora. My chest tightened. My daughter. You are stronger than anyone I've ever known. You've lived alone, grown, endured, without anyone to guide you. I watched you from afar. I saw you graduate. I saw your name honored on your university's website. And each time, I felt myself shrink a little, not from pride, but from regret. He gave a weary smile, pressing his hand to his chest. I let you walk through your youth without a single word of recognition. And now, if you're willing, I want you to turn this inheritance into something meaningful. Not for me. Not for the family. Just for you. I don't remember when my head sank forward. Everything blurred before my eyes, just like the final frame of the video where my father looked straight into the lens, pressed his lips together, and whispered, "I love you." I may be late, but that love never left. The screen faded to black. Silence settled over the room like a thick, heavy blanket covering every soul present. "Mr." Crane reached forward, adjusted the volume knob, and said calmly, "This recording was made at Cedars Sinai Medical Center, witnessed by 2 nurses, an independent clinical psychologist, and certified with full documentation of Mr. Richard Mason's cognitive clarity at the time of filming." Kyle was nearly unhinged. He shouted. No, he was sick. He didn't know what he was saying. "I'll have it investigated. I'll take this to the Supreme Court." Vanessa didn't stop him. She was lost in her own quiet storm of tears, tears that may have come from regret, from heartbreak, or maybe just the bitter sting of defeat. The attorney reached silently into his briefcase, placed a thick folder on the table. "These are the full medical records, neurological assessments, and signed statements from 3 attending specialists. All fully legal, fully valid. We are prepared to defend them at any level of court." I no longer looked at Kyle. I no longer looked at Vanessa. I just sat there surrounded by a strange, solemn stillness. As if some part of me had just been summoned home, reclaimed, returned to where it always should have been. Inside me, there was no anger, no blame, only a quiet sorrow. Like the air after rain leaving behind the scent of wet earth, and the first glimmer of light. I stood up and gave a small nod to the attorney. There was nothing more I needed. No further recognition. I had heard enough. And for the first time in my life, I no longer felt like a stranger in my own story. 1 year later, the California sky was clear and bright on an early spring morning. On the campus of Stanford University, where I had once graduated on a full scholarship, a new bronze plaque stood tall in front of the psychology department building. It read, "The Elise Foundation, for Daughters Who Were Forgotten." It was the first day of operation for the scholarship fund named after my mother, Elise Hamilton Mason. The foundation would cover tuition and living expenses for girls who had lost their parents or had been abandoned by their families. Girls like I once was forced to walk through a life they should never have faced alone. I didn't speak at the opening ceremony. No long speech. No cameras, no media coverage. Just students sitting quietly under the trees, listening to the sound of a piano playing Claire de Lune performed by a freshman. The same piece my mother used to play every morning when I was small. At the same time, in a courtroom in Los Angeles, the final appeal filed by Vanessa and Kyle was officially dismissed. The court ruled that the will was entirely legal, with no evidence of coercion or psychological manipulation. I didn't attend the hearing. I didn't care who testified, who cried, or who walked out in silence. Because I knew the truth needs no defenders. It stands on its own. Over the past year, media outlets had reached out, CNN, The New York Times, Oprah Daily. Everyone wanted the story of the daughter who unexpectedly inherited $36 million after a life of being forgotten. I declined them all. Instead, I submitted just one line through my legal representative to a tiny local paper, the same one I used to hand out flyers for back in college. My greatest inheritance isn't money, it's the dignity I kept by never begging for anything. And I meant it. No one knew, and no one needed to know, that the night before the will reading, I had sat alone at the Santa Monica Pier, the wind biting cold, clutching my father's handwritten letter, reading it over and over like a child, learning how to read for the first time. No one knew how hard I had fought not to let the anger swallow me whole. Not to let it define me one more time. Once, I walked past a vintage furniture store and saw a piano identical to the one my mother used to play. I bought it. Not to display, but so I could, from time to time, play A Time for Us. The piece my mother once said was for those who believe in true love, even if it arrives late. And there's one more thing no one knows. I never moved into the Aspen estate my father left behind. I donated it, turned it into a mental health recovery center for adolescents who had experienced abuse in their families. The center is called Lantern House because not all homes have light. Because I understand now, not every house is a home. But every child deserves a place to begin again. I haven't seen Vanessa or Kyle since the day of the will reading. I don't know how they're living, where they are, or whether they've changed. And honestly, I don't care anymore. Because my journey was never about revenge. It was about returning. To myself. To the little girl who was pushed out of her room. To the young woman who waited for a father's congratulations. To the woman I'm becoming, who no longer needs anyone's validation because I've chosen to love myself. And as my mother once wrote in the old notebook she kept by her bedside, live in a way that, in the end, your heart stays soft, but your back stays strong. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you in any way, feel free to share your own in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell to join us in the next story.